"All 3 San Diego rentals go to my son," my father said with pride during the will reading. "She receives nothing." The space blew apart. 30 people cheered as if someone had just announced the Chargers were returning to town, and chairs and scraping glasses clinked. Ryan, my older brother, stood there taking in the cheers as if they were sunshine. Brooke, his fiancée, put a palm to her chest and muttered, "Oh my God, baby, you deserve this." Even my mother, who would typically only cry during Christmas church services, was as proud as ever as she dabbed the corner of her eye with the tip of her napkin. I didn't applaud. I didn't recoil. I didn't even blink. I simply gave Ryan a tiny gentle grin that always gave the impression that I was being courteous rather than menacing. I then turned to face Mr. Hollis, the family lawyer who had been practicing estate law since before I was born, and I uttered the words that stopped everyone in the room. "You're not really sure, are you?" Blinking behind his bifocals, Mr. Hollis straightened. For a man who consistently exuded confidence in the world and his role within it, it was satisfying to see the bewilderment on his face. He looked at the thick estate folder on his lap, then back at me as though a line of text may appear on the page and speak for itself. Dad yelled, "No what?" At that point. One of the cousins dropped her champagne flute in shock as his voice broke on the final syllable. The only sounds in the room for 2 full seconds after it broke on the hardwood floor were the tiny crackling sounds of glass rolling to a stop and the soft hum of the AC vent above us. Every smile vanished from every face as every head turned to face me. With catered dishes steaming in the dining room and a banner honoring Margaret's legacy tacked slightly crooked on the wall, everyone in the living room, 30 people crammed beneath white rental lights, suddenly understood something was approaching that they hadn't anticipated. Let me take you back before I reveal exactly what my dad was unaware of, and before I demonstrate how one reserved woman with a bag full of paper might completely upend an afternoon. Because these kinds of stories don't begin at will readings. They begin years ago in the moments that only the individual who experienced them can recall. You might have assumed my family was the epitome of a Southern California success story if you had met us before to that day. Large La Mesa home, rental income, endless Christmas cards with matching sweaters, and backyard July 4th cookouts where Dad boasted to neighbors about our expanding portfolio. However, there was a subdued hierarchy that controlled everything underneath all that glamour. Ryan was the name at the top of that hierarchy. People began to notice my brother as soon as he returned from the hospital at the age of 3 days, already appearing as though the world would bow for him. They listened to him first, forgave him the quickest, and placed the least amount of responsibility on him. In high school, he was the quarterback, the young man who was hailed by all coaches and whom all aunts and uncles believed would eventually become the head of the family. "Me," he said, "I grew up in the shade." Only after Ryan laughed did the teachers correct themselves after mistaking our names. Because he is older, his gifts were unwrapped first during birthday celebrations. "Give him up." Dad questioned him about his plans for sports at the dinner table. The unfocused response to my ambitions was, "That's nice, honey." I wasn't despised by anyone. I wasn't mistreated, yelled at, or subjected to any other dramatic behavior. I was just not there. The girl who was always self-sufficient. The person who had nothing to need. The one who would be all right. Moments that ought to have been entirely mine were never. Dad hardly looked up from his coffee when I was admitted on an academic scholarship at San Diego State. He said, "I guess someone has to leave California," as if my entire future was a hassle. Mom frowned and indicated that the time wasn't right when I requested for money for a math tutor in 7th grade. Ryan needed new football cleats. "You're already so smart," she continued. "You'll work things out." In actuality, I did figure it out, but not the way they anticipated. On my 22nd birthday, I packed everything I owned into my beat-up Civic, drove onto I-8, and didn't look back as Ryan was being toasted at a family barbecue for handling the rental books. As I drove east, the desert flattening ahead and the mountains rising behind me, I made a self-promise to myself that I would create a life in which being quiet didn't entail being ignored. I ultimately enlisted in the military, more specifically the Navy. A common misconception about the Navy is that it just has ships and uniforms. Yes, there is some of it, but for me it was the first time I had ever been evaluated based on my qualifications rather than my family's standing. No one in my training unit gave a damn about Ryan's identity. Dad's ambitious ambitions and the Whitaker rents didn't matter to anyone. It mattered if you could carry your weight, whether you followed through, and whether you showed up. I picked things up quickly. Organization, data, and logistics planning, things that no one at home ever appreciated, were suddenly the qualities that made me respected. I was requested to plan transportation, conduct inventory checks, and oversee the minute things that kept everything running smoothly. I was not someone's other child for the first time in my life. I was just skilled at what I did. Grandma Margaret was another. The only member of my family that truly saw me was she. She used to tell me as a child, "Tegan, you have the clearest eyes in the family. You recognize the reality of things." I assumed at the time that she meant I saw crooked picture frames or unclean dishes. It turns out that she had much more in mind. Every time I was on leave from the Navy, I would go see her. She lived in a small home with windows overlooking the ocean, a porch swing that creaked every time she rocked on it, and windows that were constantly open to the salt air. She would genuinely listen when I asked about my work, my unit, and my plans. My oxygen came from those visits. Grandma never made disparaging remarks about Ryan or Dad. She was not required to. "There's more than one kind of strength, honey," she murmured, simply staring at me with her piercing blue eyes. "Loudness is seen by your family as a sign of leadership. It doesn't. If only they had paid attention. Because it would be Grandma's faith in me that transformed everything years later, long after the uniforms, long after the deployments, long after I discovered how power and bureaucracy subtly affect everything. And that's why Dad yelled, "No what?" in front of 30 people on the afternoon of the reading. I didn't even recoil. I was already aware of the solution. If you don't know what it was like to grow up in a home where every compliment had a direction and never targeted at me, you won't be able to comprehend what transpired at that particular reading. Not once, not even by chance. Favoritism sometimes manifests as extravagant presents or preferential treatment. However, it was quieter in our home. It was in the pauses, the unasked inquiries, and the way my brother's errors were laughed off while my demands were treated like annoyances. I can't recall the first time Ryan was referred to as the family's future. It was merely a statement made by adults. Every time family members got together, whether it was for a barbecue, a birthday celebration, a graduation or another event, someone would give him a pat on the back and discuss how he would carry the Whitaker name. Even as a child, I knew that disputing with it would be like arguing with gravity because of how confidently they asserted it. It just was. When I was 10 years old, I recall one 4th of July. We were at Crown Point Park, where smoking children were waiting in the bay and everyone was perspiring under the July sun grills. I wanted to show Grandma that I had put a lot of effort into something, so I spent a week practicing cartwheels and small flips. However, Ryan cannonballed into the water as soon as I tried, splashing half the family, and everyone erupted in cheers and laughing. "Sweetie, not right now," my mother murmured, waving at me from her beach chair. "You'll become filthy." I realized that sometimes a person doesn't need to be told they're secondary as I stood there dripping bay water. They merely observe where the spotlight is focused. I had given up attempting to get attention by high school, in part to avoid comparisons and in part because I understood how the game operated. I joined any clubs that didn't conflict with Ryan's activities. When I participated in an intellectual decathlon in the 11th grade, Dad said he didn't really understand that kind of stuff and remained home to fix a loose porch light instead of attending all of Ryan's games. The following day, Mom proudly brought cookies and said, "But don't make a big fuss. This weekend is Ryan's playoff game." There was a hierarchy even on holidays. Ryan opened the largest box first on Christmas morning, followed by the second and third largest. My gifts were useful items like shoes, school supplies, and sweaters that didn't require much thought. Mom gave me a hug when I was accepted to SDSU on a scholarship. However, Dad simply stated, "Well, someone needs to go learn something. Assisting with the rents, your brother already has a bright future." What about the rentals? The golden thread was always that. Dad enjoyed discussing their 3 San Diego County homes. They were steady, but they weren't elegant. There are older single-family establishments in Chula Vista Lakeside and a marginally better one close to Claremont. Grandma had used her pension and earnings from her time as an elementary school teacher to purchase the first one decades prior. She meticulously constructed her small empire, ensuring that every home had a family she liked. She sent Christmas cards to the children and knew the names of all the renters. Dad trusted Ryan with them. He managed repairs, collected rent checks, and gave Dad receipts starting at the age of 18. I later discovered that receipts were frequently overstated or non-existent. But Dad believed everything back then. He would state that the boy puts forth a lot of effort. He is gaining knowledge of the industry. One day, he'll look after us. I didn't even participate in the discussion. Grandma, however, had a different perspective. She resided in a little unnoticeable pale yellow cottage close to Ocean Beach. Her living room's translucent curtains let in exactly the right amount of sunlight, which caused the dust to gently shimmer, would stretch out on the floor with whatever book I was reading while she sat in her rocking rocker, her knitting needles clicking away. She consistently posed thought-provoking questions to me. This week, what did you learn? What did you accomplish that made you feel proud? What are you going to do next? She claimed that I could see where things were going long before they happened because my mind functioned like a compass. Years later, I realized what she meant. She was going through a pile of property management documents one afternoon when I was 19 and on a weekend getaway from college. Her eyes remained keen, but her arthritis caused her hands to shake a little. "Does any of this make sense to you?" she questioned, looking up. I quickly saw discrepancies when I took up a ledger and scanned a page. Too many cash receipt numbers that didn't match tenant payment histories, too many emergency repairs. I gently brought it up, assuming she would dismiss it. Rather, she gave a hesitant nod that seemed to reinforce a suspicion she already had. "I thought so," she replied. "You see things as they really are. I kept it a secret from my folks. I kept it a secret from Ryan. I kept it a secret. I had no intention of catching anyone. I simply assumed that Grandma needed assistance with filing. However, everything that transpired at the will reading was a result of the seed that was sown in that moment. I strayed after college. I had no idea what I desired. I saved money, worked part-time jobs, and argued with my father about spending more time at home. I eventually enlisted. Being in the military wasn't a pipe fantasy. It was a way out. As it happened, it was the first time I ever felt like I belonged there. Ryan was unknown in the Navy. Family rentals, the heyday of high school, or the Whitaker family name were unimportant to anyone. They were interested in whether you performed your duties, followed through, and could be relied upon. I could too. Logistics was my initial assignment, followed by operations support. I gained knowledge about supply chains, inventory management, and handling paperwork that required accuracy since lives depended on it. These years served as the basis for my subsequent understanding of the financial and legal aspects of whatever Grandma requested me to do. In the meantime, my parents and I grew farther apart. There were fewer calls. Holidays became more subdued. Dad assumed I had nothing else going on and only got in touch when Ryan wanted assistance with relocating tenants or inspecting repairs. However, I visited Grandma each time I returned home from leave. She would prepare sweet tea, open her windows to let the sea breeze into the house, and discuss the family inheritance with me, not the wealth but the obligation. Rental properties, in her opinion, were more than just possessions. They served as houses for people. These locations are as much a part of the families who inhabit them as they are of us. In her words, a good landlord is a good steward. She never predicted that I would eventually take over. She never gave Ryan any criticism. She just educated me softly and methodically, like though she was getting me ready for something she already anticipated. In retrospect, I saw that she was the first to discover the truth. The reality of Ryan's desires and Dad's beliefs. And the reality of who I would ultimately have to become to defend what was important. Because families don't disintegrate overnight. They disintegrate moment by moment, drip by drip, until eventually the dam breaks. And for us, that day of shattering would come sooner than any of them could have predicted. If moving away from home at the age of 22 was my first taste of freedom, then enlisting in the Navy was the first time I truly felt at ease. When you first set foot on a base, the early morning fog lifts recruits as they hustle across huge concrete flags and whip in the wind, making you realize how tiny your former world had been. I recall thinking, no one here knows Ryan, as I stood in line that first morning, my uniform pristine and my boots firm. Dad is unknown to everyone here. The Whitaker rentals are unknown to everyone here. I get to be myself for once. I was able to go over the shock of basic training with that thought. It was shocking, I assure you. The kind of shock you get when a chief petty officer kicks open the door like he's attacking the cosmos at 4:30 in the morning. But something unexpected occurred beneath the drills, the shouting, and the never-ending push-ups. I discovered that I could depend on myself. I had to, not because anyone told me I could. On other evenings, while I lay in my bunk arms, shaking from training, I wondered about home. When Dad spoke to Ryan, his tone would shift to one that was full of pride and faith. the way he regarded me as if I were a piece of a puzzle from another box. It was painful once. But the old hurt became clear in a world where people rated you based on work rather than ancestry. I didn't place second for the first time. They didn't ignore me. I wasn't the one who would be all right by herself. I could do it. I also learned something new while on a logistics rotation. I was a detail-oriented person. I found myself organizing how everything fit together naturally, while others moaned over supply inventories and transportation schedules. Which shipments experienced delays due to missing signatures? Which unit failed to submit its maintenance forms? Which figures on gasoline usage reports didn't match? Not because I was smart, but rather because I had been the quiet person in the room for years, keeping an eye on everything while no one else did. And that ability was invaluable in the military. I was given additional duties. I wrote reports that became protocols. Senior officials began requesting that I verify chain of custody logs or double-check equipment data. The deference wasn't ostentatious. No one applauded Ryan as much as they did at his football games, but it was consistent and well-earned. I wasn't an afterthought for anyone. The irony was that my ties to home grew weaker as I matured in the Navy. Mom's phone calls were brief. Dad only gave Ryan a call when he needed something. I texted the family group chat after getting promoted. Ryan gave a thumbs up in response. Dad didn't say anything. Grandma Margaret was the only one who joined me in celebrating. The following day, she told me over the phone, "You sound different, stronger." I recall settling over the base and sitting outside the barracks on a warm California evening, believing she was the only one who could hear me clearly, would occasionally drive down to see her while on leave. Her silver hair would be pulled up with a pencil, while she rocked gently on her porch with a blanket covering her knees. She would light up when she saw me in a way that warmed my chest like someone had opened a window. "How are you doing in the Navy, my love?" "Better than I had anticipated." "How are you being treated by your family?" I would be hesitant. "The same, roughly." With gentle eyes, she would nod. "Until they want to, people don't change." I assisted her in bringing in groceries one evening. Sweating onto coasters she had crocheted herself, we sat at her kitchen table with 2 glasses of sweet tea. She genuinely wanted to understand the systems, paperwork, audits, and protocols, so she asked me about my time in the Navy. I described how an entire chain of operations could be disrupted by a single lost receipt. Her face became contemplative. "You keep things honest," she murmured. "You wouldn't believe how uncommon that is." She was observing me and the person I was becoming, even though I was unaware of this at the time. She had grown up in my brother's shadow as a youngster, but now she was an adult who was disciplined, self-reliant, and clear-headed. Years went by. After completing my service, I briefly went back home before relocating to a small apartment close to Mission Valley. At first, civilian life seemed weird. I missed the rhythm and the organization. I therefore submitted an application to work as a junior analyst for a commercial real estate company downtown. Although it wasn't glamorous, the work was steady and made use of all the skills I had acquired in the Navy, including collecting details, organizing paperwork, and identifying irregularities. I gained more knowledge about real estate than I had anticipated. Zoning regulations, trust arrangements, easements, leases, and asset transfers. Words that formerly sounded like something my father used to discuss when he wanted to sound significant suddenly become tools that I truly understood. And my memories of those rental homes grew as I learned more. Curiosity, not jealousy or bitterness. Ryan assisted with managing the rentals, according to Dad. However, the figures, documents, and receipts that Grandma had once shown me never quite matched. Now that I had my training and experience under my belt, I understood that they weren't meant to coincide. They were intended to perplex anyone who was unsure of what to look for. However, I did now. I contacted Grandma from the parking garage one evening after a demanding workday. I informed her about landlords who concealed maintenance, emergency, and other costs, and about renters who attempted to contest rent increases. She paid attention to everything I said. "Tegan, I want you to come visit me this weekend," she whispered softly after a lengthy silence. "I need you to look at something. I wanted to know what it was." Her voice became much quieter. "I trust you to be honest with me since there are some things that don't add up." I assumed it was just paperwork, perhaps a tenant discrepancy or a missed payment. But the next Saturday, as I drove toward her along the coast, I couldn't get rid of the notion that this wasn't simply about paperwork. This had to do with family, legacy, and something far more significant than I realized. And I wasn't mistaken. Because everything in our family quietly changed that weekend. The one with the 2 folders, the pot of coffee strong enough to rouse the dead, and the first true glance behind the curtain. The son Dad worshipped was no longer the focus of the future that weekend. Over the weekend, my part in the Whitaker tale started to change from that of a supporting player to that of the truth-teller. When I pulled into Grandma Margaret's driveway that Saturday morning, I can still clearly recall the sensation of the ocean wind. The kind of breeze that caused her wind chimes to clink like little bells was chilly and slightly salty. For me, her home in Old Ocean Beach had always been a haven where time seemed to stand still. However, there was something heavier and still anticipatory in the air when I got out of the automobile that day. Even though it wasn't cold, she was already waiting in the buttoned porch cardigan. The wicker table next to her had 2 large folders neatly stacked. She didn't wave like she always did when she saw me. She merely gave a nod. "We have a lot to go over, sweetheart," he stated slowly and solemnly. As she liked to remark, she had already prepared coffee strong enough to strip paint inside and laid out her tattered yellow legal pad. She shoved the first folder in my direction. "Start with this." My gut constricted as I opened it. These were not informal documents. These were documents. Check stubs from renters I knew by name, bank statements, rent ledgers, and maintenance invoices. And I could tell something wasn't right after just one look. The figures didn't add up. The timings were inconsistent. Additionally, the handwriting, I knew that handwriting. Ryan's signature was scrolled across the bottom of a maintenance log claiming a $2,400 emergency roof repair. I turned to the following page. One more urgent repair, then one more. Some photocopied receipts were completely missing, and others were so faint they could not be read. As I turned each page, Grandma observed me. Her eyes conveyed that she already understood, but her mouth remained motionless. She finally said, "Just tell me, honey," after over 20 minutes of stillness. "Tell me what you observe." I carefully put the folder down. "Money's missing," I declared. "And not only once. It has been going on for some time." Her jaw clenched with sadness rather than rage. The only sound that shattered the tense air between us was the old wall clock above her sink ticking. She then slid the second folder in my direction after opening it. She whispered, "If he could bleed the houses dry while I was alive. When I'm gone, just think of what he would do." The folder included draft documents, thick paper, neat signatures, and blank spaces that needed to be filled. A revocable living trust designating me as the successor trustee and her as the trustee for life. Every property in Chula Vista, Lakeside, and Claremont is listed in the asset schedule. Unsigned but prepared are 8 quitclaim deeds. These were prepared months ago by my attorney. Her voice was firm but low as she spoke. "I didn't know when it would be appropriate to show them to you, but now I do." My throat constricted. "This is everything, Grandma." "Yes," she replied. "And you will receive it." Instinctively, I shook my head. "Why me? Mom, why not? Or even Ryan if we resolve the financial issues. I don't want to ruin the family." Her face softened. Not sympathy, but the profound comprehension of someone who had been waiting for me to pose that query for years. She took my hand and murmured, "Tegan. You are the favorite, but that doesn't mean I'm handing you these houses. You are the one who sees things clearly, so I'm delivering them to you. You look after people. Making noise doesn't require power. To place an order, you use it." I muttered, "But Dad will go insane." "Ryan is going to." She softly interrupted, "Ryan will have to grow up. Since he was able to walk and see where it took him, the youngster has received accolades. Careless choices, quick corners, and dishonesty. I'm not penalizing him. I'm defending everything I created against the person he's turning into." I gazed at the trust, the pile of deeds, and the lines of notaries awaiting signatures. I had the impression that I was holding something too heavy for my hands. "Are you sure?" I inquired. Her grip was very firm as she gripped my fingers. "My girl, I've never been more sure of anything." Together, we went over each line, sentence, timetable, and definition in the documents for the remainder of the afternoon. She described how quitclaim deeds transferred title instantly, how a living trust avoided probate, and how the properties would legally belong to me regardless of the family's approval once the county recorded them. She had nothing to conceal. She wanted me to be capable, knowledgeable, and ready. Shadows began to stretch across the kitchen as the sun began to set. "The notary will be here Monday morning," she remarked as she gently stood up and rubbed her knees. "It's already set up by me. As a replacement trustee, you will sign. The deeds will be signed by me. By noon, we'll record them at the county office." I gasped for air. This was not a discussion about the future. This was now taking place. "Why so soon?" Silently, I asked. She turned to face the sliding glass door, where the sky was tinted orange by the final rays of sunshine. "I'm tired, sweetheart," she said. "And I am aware that my time is running out. I must be certain that everything is in good hands." Monday arrived sooner than I had anticipated. The notary showed there with a briefcase that clicked when she opened it and a navy blazer. There was a sense of legal finality in the small kitchen when she was there. Grandma's hands never trembled as she signed each deed. I signed every spot she indicated, initialed every page, and noted every command she gave me. Grandma put a small amount of bourbon into 2 small glasses after the notary left. "It's done," she replied, gently tapping her glass against mine. We remain silent now. Until someone tries to take something that isn't theirs, nobody has to know. That night, we set fire to the draft copies in her outdoor fireplace. The final traces of privacy vanished as smoke curled up toward the palms. I held the originals in a fireproof envelope and pressed it to my chest as if it were alive. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary over the next 2.5 years. Ryan boasted about the rents. Dad commended him for his accountability. Future inheritance was discussed by the family as if it had already been decided. Furthermore, not a single one of them ever bothered to check the county records. They would have seen my name on every action if they had. However, denial has a lot of power. It's simpler to hold on to a narrative you've practiced your entire life than to confront the truth as it is clearly written in pen. Every time I visited, Grandma would ask me the same silent inquiry as she became thinner and more delicate. "We still keep it a secret." And I would always respond in the same manner. "Yes, we still keep it a secret." She grabbed my hand so tightly that her wedding band was crushed into my skin the last time I saw her alive. "Remember, sweetheart, paper always beats promises," she said. 13 months prior to the will reading, she passed away. On that day, the quiet story started to turn into the loud one that would finally blow out in front of a room full of applauding spectators who had no idea what the real story was. Families can become strategic or sensitive as a result of grief. The Whittaker family chose the second choice following the death of Grandma Margaret. The funeral was soft, quiet, and nearly serene. People gave her hugs, shed gentle tears, and talked about her patience, lemon bars, and consistent birthday memories. However, the softness vanished the very following morning. I was packed my overnight bag when Mom called. "Could you stay another day, honey?" She reserved that delicate fluttering quality of her voice for breaking news. "We must discuss the property. Not the grandmother. Not her recollections. Not the way we would pay tribute to the woman who brought us all together. The property." I nearly declined. I ought to have declined. However, I agreed with her tone because it was thin and somewhat practiced. In retrospect, that was the first indication that things were changing behind closed doors. The next afternoon, when I came to the house, it felt weighty and strange, like I was entering the last phase of a discussion. When the purpose of the meeting has not been explained to you. With his sleeves rolled up and a legal pad in front of him, Dad took a seat at the head of the dining table. To his right, Ryan relaxed while twirling a pen between his fingers as if this was nothing out of the ordinary. Mom refilled coffee cups behind them without anyone touching them. In the middle of the table were documents that were too formal for a family discussion yet were crisp and freshly printed. "Sit, sweetheart," Mom urged, pointing to the chair across from Dad. I did not take a seat. Dad cleared his throat before making an announcement that he thought everyone in the room would accept without hesitation. He started, "This is just a simple waiver. We want to keep everything within the family, but in order to prevent misunderstandings in the future, you must sign a document stating that you do not anticipate receiving a portion of the rentals." I gently blinked once. He shoved one sheet in my direction. "Waiver of inheritance interest in real property is at the top. 8 addresses below that." My pulse did not quicken. Because I knew something others didn't, my palms didn't perspire. All those properties were already mine. With a syrupy sweet voice, Mom jumped in. Tegan, it's just paperwork. Ryan has been in charge of everything on a daily basis. It just makes obvious that he should be in complete charge. This maintains harmony. Calm? I said it again. Ryan reclined on his seat. Yes, Tegan. No one wants attorneys engaged. Once you sign it, we're done. I dropped myself into the chair because I wanted to look each person in the eye when I said the next section, not because they instructed me to. Nothing is being signed by me. The temperature in the room decreased. Mom's hand on the coffee maker froze. Dad's eyebrows rose up to almost touch his hairline. Come on, Dad replied in a tight voice. Avoid being challenging. Nothing is being taken away from you in this situation. It has to do with clarity. I pushed the paper back an inch in his direction. I refused to give up what my grandmother wanted for me. Following that statement, there was a thick molasses-like stillness. Ryan gave up twirling his pen. He was truly perplexed for the first time in years. Mom blinked more quickly than normal and started crying over Q. When I was 10 years old, Dad would tilt his head to determine whether or not I was really in danger. He said, "Where is this coming from? You've never been interested in the rentals." I said, "I've never been asked." Mom took a step toward the coffee maker, her fingers shaking. Your grandma desired for the family to be well cared for. She would be upset if we got into a fight. I nearly burst out laughing. Nearly. However, seeing two individuals attempt to use the wishes of a deceased mother as an excuse to erase their daughter was not amusing. She's not here to see anything, I said. I'm not fighting, either. I'm just refusing to sign your waiver. The cups shook when Dad gave the table a heavy whack. This is absurd. You're behaving as though we are robbing you. I got up and grabbed my suitcase. No, I'm behaving as though I know exactly what is hers. With a startled expression, Ryan leaped to his feet. You're being self-centered. Tegan is always making things more difficult than they need to be. Common. It was there. Beneath all the politeness was the family word. I made my way to the door, pausing only long enough to say the one thing I knew would haunt them. Being selfish means believing that you can conveniently change someone's legacy with only one signature. Behind me, Mom's voice broke. Please don't go like this, Tegan. However, I did. The air was heavy and still when I stepped outside into the late afternoon heat. Like a punctuation point, the screen door crashed behind me. I didn't go back. I got into my car, rolled down the windows, and opened my face to the wind. For the next 3 weeks, they pretended that I was having a tantrum. The group texts were always buzzing. As a family, let's heal. Grandma's passing shouldn't be a barrier between us. Ryan is assuming his responsibilities. Be encouraging. Dad left 2 increasingly irate voicemails. You're exaggerating the situation. This mindset is intolerable. Your mother's heart is being broken by you. The only message Ryan sent was, grow up. I didn't reply to any of it. Rather, I examined the trust, printed new copies of the recorded deeds, and arranged each document in a fireproof folder over the course of 2 evenings. I scanned everything into 2 flash drives, one for my safe and the other for a Mission Valley safety deposit box. I spoke with an estate lawyer to make sure that nothing the family attempted could reverse Grandma's documents. I already knew they were legitimate, rather than to find out whether they were. The trust was impenetrable. The actions were documented. Grandma was fully aware of what she was doing. I was legally the owner of the Whitaker residences. All I had to do was wait until someone attempted to take them away. 2 weeks later, that moment arrived, encased in a gold-bordered, thick cream cardstock. A request. We cordially welcome you to join us in honoring Margaret Whitaker's legacy and the Whitaker rental property's future. Mom's handwriting was added. 3 on Saturday. You've been missed. Come please. It was kind, affectionate, cozy, and a total fabrication. Thus this was hardly a festive occasion. It was a coronation. The last scene in a story they believed they had already written. They had no idea that I had the conclusion hidden away in a fireproof folder, just ready to be unveiled. By Saturday, the sky over San Diego had that flawless, pale clarity that the city seems to reserve for significant or unfortunate occasions. As the automobile turned turns, the fireproof folder inside my luggage, which was securely fastened to the passenger seat, tapped lightly on the side as I drove down from Mission Valley. As I approached my parents' area, The streets were increasingly crowded with parked cars, Orange County cousins, acquaintances, and neighbors who had witnessed Ryan's upbringing as if he were a local celebrity. It didn't feel like a memorial service. It had the atmosphere of a coronation. The backyard was filled with white tents. Trays of lemon tarts, shrimp cocktail, and small crab cakes were unloaded by caterers. Beneath the oak tree was a bartender dressed in a clean black vest. The 8 rental homes were marked in bright red on a massive poster board that someone had set up on an easel. In a sense, I was arriving at a business negotiation as I wheeled my bag up the driveway. When Mom noticed me, she rushed down the stairs. "You made it, honey." She gave me an overly tight hug. Her scent stuck to my clothing. Dad trailed behind her, giving me an overly joyful shoulder clap. "It's nice to have the entire family together," he remarked, glancing suspiciously at my suitcase. With mimosas in their hands, Ryan and Brooke stood on the porch. "Ne faux salute," he raised his glass. "Look who decided to show up," he remarked. With her ring finger flashing diamonds, Brooke leaned closer him and giggled. "I didn't answer. I didn't need to." The Whitaker family rentals glossy brochures were arranged within the house like a presentation. Coffee tables represented a new era. Soft piano music was played on a portable speaker. Families and tenants we had rented to for years mingled with courteous smiles. It was all organized around a single main concept. The heir was Ryan. Ryan was in charge. Ryan was selected to continue the tradition. The narrative was already written. They considered me to be merely a footnote. I counted faces as I looked around the room. 28, 29, and 30 were enough witnesses to ensure that no one could later claim to have misremembered what had happened. Mr. Hollis, the family lawyer, showed up at precisely 3:10 p.m. He shook hands as though he were presiding over the merger of land and royalty, looking delightfully satisfied. He carried a sleek, professional-looking leather briefcase that was completely worthless in the face of an unknown truth. Dad gave his champagne flute a tap. "Come together in the living room, everyone. We're about to start." People entered the room in shuffles. The chairs scratched. Kids were quiet. The gentle piano tune ended. Then it began. Ryan raised his glass and shouted loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear, standing behind Dad like a prince next to the throne. "I would want to express my gratitude to everyone who came to honor Grandma Margaret. Her heritage is officially transferred to the following generation today." Heads gave a nod. It was said, "Hear, hear." Another gave 2 claps. Ryan said with pride, "All 8 rental homes are officially under my name as of this afternoon. As my parents have always desired, I will be in charge of them moving forward." There was a thunderous round of cheers. Whistles and cheers. "Go Ryan," was even yelled by someone. And I didn't move, clap, or blink during it all. Mr. Hollis cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. "I'll start reading once everyone has calmed down." Dad, however, cut him off because he was too excited to control himself. He roared, "We already know how this goes. My son gets all 3 of the San Diego rentals. He gave me a thumbs up. Receives nothing." One more round of applause. Ryan received a back slap from a cousin. With a smile on her face, Brooke seemed to have just married into royalty. The truth was then revealed to everyone in the room. As I moved forward, the sound of my suitcase's wheels clicking on the hardwood sliced like a knife through the applause. The conversation broke off in the middle of a phrase. Halfway to the lips, glasses froze. I placed the luggage next to the coffee table and turned the metal latches. Click, click. People's heads turned. Mom's grin wavered. Dad's expression stiffened. I took out the first quitclaim deed after opening the lid. The gold notary seal caught the overhead light as it was gently held between 2 fingers. I then placed it on the table. The whole room fell silent. The second deed was placed by me. The 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and final were bound documents that were 1 inch thick and had highlighted sections that could be seen through the translucent cover. Margaret Whitaker's Revocable Living Trust. People let out gasps. A woman touched her throat. Orange liquid gathered around Brooke's sandals as her mimosa fell out of her palm and broke on the carpet. Dad staggered ahead. "What? Which ones are those?" I gave him a direct look. I whispered, "You really don't know." A little but steady voice broke through the commotion before Mr. Hollis could reply. That day I was there. Everybody looked around. Dylan, my younger cousin, was standing close to the corridor with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders shaking a little. He moved to the front. He said, "I drove Grandma to the notary. She requested that I keep it a secret. She expressed her desires rather clearly." Dad appeared to have been punched. Mom collapsed into the couch. Ryan gasped in short, angry breaths. At last, I said something. Grandma instructed me to hold off until someone attempted to take something that wasn't theirs. It appeared to be the right day. With a gentle thump that reverberated like a gavel, the attorney closed the trust. "There is nothing to distribute," he stated legally. "Tegan is the only owner of the properties. The matter is over. End of matter." For the first time in my life, a member of my family expressed an unchangeable reality. With his head in his hands, Dad sagged forward. Mom started crying. After muttering something, Brooke bolted out the front door. Ryan looked at me with the sad eyes of someone who had suddenly realized the repercussions of all the simple compliments he had ever received. Grandma had been correct all along, so I just stood there calmly and steadily, just as she had instructed. Paper consistently outperforms promises. Long after the lawyer had closed his briefcase, the living room remained motionless. Quiet is not what I mean. I'm talking about shock that was so intense you could feel it on your skin. When the shaking stops following an earthquake, a certain silence descends. However, the world has yet to decide how to proceed. With his elbows on his knees, Dad sat slumped forward, gazing at the floor as if it would rise up and respond differently. Mom remained on the couch, her shoulders trembling as mascara ran down her face. Like a cornered animal, Ryan paced in a small circle while talking incoherently to himself. The renters, friends, aunts, and cousins all avoided looking at me. I had been the quiet one in the background for 30 years. Nobody in the room could look beyond me for the first time. I clicked the latches shut the suitcase, and got to my feet. Dad at last found his voice at that point. "We had no idea, Tegan, darling." On the final syllable, his voice broke. "This is something we can resolve. The documentation will be redone. You don't need to inherit everything from your brother." I inhaled slowly. "I didn't take anything, Dad. 3 years ago, Grandma gave it to me." Mom looked up, her eyes puffy and red. She muttered, "We thought Ryan needed it more. It's him who is staying here. You're going to live your life." We pondered. "You believe that I subtly stated that I wouldn't mind being left out." Since they had never said the truth aloud, neither of them got into an argument. I had always been the kid they thought would go unnoticed while the important kid got everything. Ryan lunged in my direction. Then anger that was so intense it appeared to be a fever. "Do you believe that this elevates you above me? Do you believe you deserve this? You performed your little ambush after allowing us to organize everything."
No, interrupta.
"You organized something that wasn't your own. No one was ambushed by me. I defended what was already mine." The cousin who had driven Grandma that day, Dylan, moved in front of us. He muttered, "She's telling the truth. Grandma had faith in her." That didn't match the story we intended, so we all disregarded it. Ryan tightened his jaw. "You're siding with her." Dylan answered, "I'm taking Grandma's side." At that moment, the room moved. Just a slight tipping of the scales, like a teeter-totter suddenly landing on the side that had been bearing the truth all along, not dramatic, not like in a film. I didn't stay to see the rest fall apart. I grabbed my suitcase and moved in the direction of the entrance. Mom yelled after me once more as I got to the threshold, "Small broken ion, please don't hate us." I put my hand on the doorknob and paused. I whispered, "I don't hate you. However, I'm done being the person you overlook." It was not the loss of the properties that caused the tear to fall down her face. It was about letting go of the delusion that she had been impartial. I stepped outside into the sunshine of the late afternoon. The sky was starting to turn gold. Unaware that a whole family legacy had just fallen in a living room 1 block away, children on the adjacent street were laughing while riding road bikes. That night, I drove back to my Mission Valley home, where I slept better than I had in months. After 3 months, consequences, real ones, not reprimands at family dinners, finally found their proper place. Every leasing agreement no longer included Ryan's name, assigned the updated instructions that were sent to the tenants. Some were completely unaware of it. The only thing that changed for them was that the repairs were completed on schedule. My brother's weekends would no longer be financed by emergency fees. Put an end to phony roof repairs. No more maintenance receipts going missing. Ryan received a letter from the IRS a month later. It turns out that he was eventually caught by years of deducting trip costs that were really personal. They placed a hold on anything that was still in his name and froze his accounts. He hurried to hire an attorney, but it turned out that attorneys cost money, which he was no longer able to afford. Brooke mailed her engagement ring back. Ryan couldn't afford to keep the diamond and a small padded envelope, but there was no note. 30 days after the will was read, my parents sold the large house. First to go were the boats, then the jet skis, and last Mom's jewels. Rather than the bay, they rented a 2-bedroom condo with a view of a parking lot. He said, Dad retired early due to stress. Mom began working at a nearby boutique part-time. Thanksgiving was not hosted by anyone. Nobody had the courage. I remained in my small Mission Valley condo. My mortgage was paid off in full by the rental income from the houses. Tenants were contacted within an hour by the local management business I hired, which was owned by 2 women. The number of open positions decreased. The cost of maintenance has stabilized. Consistent care was evident in the city documents. I was not surviving for the first time in my life and for the first time in years. I was calm, steady, and fully present. But there was one more item to deal with. Dad asked to meet 2 months after they moved. Not directly through a cousin, nor through Mom. He recommended a neighborhood diner that he used to take us to as children before the world separated us into roles. He didn't appear physically smaller as I entered, rather, he appeared diminished or perhaps humbled. He stood slowly, as though he wasn't sure if he could still give me a hug. Thank you for coming, he said in a rough voice. We took a seat. Neither of us drank the coffee that the waitress had poured. There was a long pause before he spoke. I was wrong, he said. Just those 3 sentences about the rents, about Ryan, and about you, no preamble, no explanation. My chest relaxed in some way. Just release, not forgiveness. He went on, I thought I was protecting the family. However, all I did was defend a narrative that was no longer accurate. He had tears in his eyes. I ought to have realized your value long ago. You've been waiting your entire life for a parent to say something like that. And it doesn't always feel like a victory when it does come. It has a human vibe. He said, I want to do better with what I have left, but I can't undo the past. I believed him because he appeared to be a man worn out from faking, not because I wanted to. To be honest, we spoke softly for about an hour. He did not request the return of the properties. He didn't ask for pardon. All he wanted to know was how things went so wrong and how we could start again cautiously and gently with boundaries. He put a tentative but genuine touch on my shoulder as we got up to go. I'm proud of you, he declared. I should have said that long ago. I had been waiting for that sentence for 31 years. I simply nodded instead of crying. Because feeling is not necessary for some things to be significant. All they require is the truth. After 3 more months, life took on a more subdued form. The properties prospered. Tenants felt safe. There was some stability for my parents. Ryan had to learn humility the hard way. And I discovered that victory does not lead to peace. It results from deciding what and who can no longer drain you. On certain evenings, while the San Diego skyline shines in the distance from my balcony, I reflect on the young child who patiently awaited attention but never received it. I would tell her this if I could speak with her right now. When doors don't open for you, walk away. Construct new ones. Allow the appropriate individuals to pass through. I would also tell her that her grandmother was correct. Character is superior to everything, but paper is superior to promises. Tell me where you're listening from if you've ever had to choose between the peace you created for yourself and the family you were born into. Your narrative is important. Your limits are important. Additionally, you ought to live a life in which your value is never overlooked. I appreciate you giving me this time. Prioritize taking care of yourself and maintain your strength and stability.